What's the hardest thing you've had to forgive, or never could?
For as long as I can remember, my family has treated my life like it was just the background noise to my brother's main event, as if every accomplishment I worked for was some kind of footnote, while even the smallest, most unremarkable thing he did was framed as a triumph worthy of an entire celebration. I could graduate top of my class, holding a degree I had paid for myself through endless hours of part-time work while juggling internships and a full course load, and all I would get was a distracted "that's nice" before the conversation shifted to how Mark had just signed up for a half marathon, as if filling out an online form was an act of discipline and heroism. I could get promoted after years of grinding through late nights, covering for absent coworkers, and pulling projects back from the brink, and they'd respond with a lukewarm, "good job" text, while at the same time they would plan an entire dinner with balloons and cake to celebrate the fact that Mark had been recognized for his leadership because he agreed to train the new guy at his office. It wasn't just the events themselves, it was the pattern, and patterns are harder to ignore because they become part of the air you breathe. Birthdays? Mine were always tight this year, so maybe just a small gathering at home, yet somehow Mark's birthday would turn into a full weekend affair, with restaurant reservations, custom cakes, and extended family flying in. Achievements? I'd share that I had just landed a contract with one of the biggest clients in our industry, and my mother would smile politely before launching into a detailed retelling of how Mark's team at work had won some internal office award for innovation, which, when I asked later, turned out to be a game they played during a training seminar. It was like I was the constant undercurrent of stability, someone they assumed would keep moving forward without much effort or drama, while Mark was the golden child whose every step needed to be acknowledged, documented, and amplified, no matter how small. And look, I used to think it was just me being overly sensitive, maybe too aware of every imbalance, but over the years, I started keeping mental score, not because I wanted to be petty, but because I needed to know if I was imagining it. I wasn't. When I bought my first condo, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom I'd saved for over 6 years to afford, the only comment my dad made was to remind me that property taxes were a big responsibility, and my mom suggested I shouldn't stretch myself too thin. That same year, Mark got a used SUV, financed over 5 years with a questionable interest rate, and the family not only threw a barbecue in his honor, but my dad gave a toast about how proud we are of Mark's big step into adulthood. I stood there with a paper plate in my hands, nodding and smiling, wondering if anyone even noticed the irony. Eventually, I stopped bringing up my wins at all. It wasn't that I wanted to hide them, but I knew how it would go. A quick acknowledgement followed by a pivot to whatever Mark had done that week. Over time, I became the listener in my own family, the one who knew every detail of my brother's office politics, dating life, gym routine, and minor inconveniences, while they could barely remember the name of my manager or the city my last work trip had taken me to. And the more I withdrew, the more comfortable they seemed, as if my silence made it easier to keep the spotlight exactly where they wanted it. I wish I could say I confronted them about it, that I sat everyone down and demanded to know why my life was treated like filler material, but the truth is I didn't. Part of me didn't want to hear their excuses, because I already knew what they'd be. "Oh, that's just how we are," or "we don't mean anything by it," or the classic, "you've always been independent, we didn't think you needed it." And maybe that's the cruelest part of it. They genuinely believed that I didn't need what they gave him so freely, that I was somehow self-sustaining and unaffected by their lack of acknowledgement. But the thing about being underestimated for so long is that it builds something inside you, not just resentment, though there was plenty of that, but a kind of quiet determination to prove, if not to them, then to yourself, that you can rise so far above their limited expectations that they're forced to see you differently. Not because you need their approval, but because you want the satisfaction of watching their entire version of reality shift in a single moment. And that's exactly what started brewing in me last year. I had been working on a massive project at work, one of those things that could make or break a career, and while I kept it vague with my family, they were well aware that I was busy and under pressure. What they didn't know was that this project, if successful, came with a bonus so significant it would be life-changing, the kind of money that could either be blown on something flashy or turned into something permanent. I already knew which choice I would make, and I already knew I wouldn't breathe a word of it to them until the time was right. I listened to them over the holidays, talking endlessly about how Mark had been shortlisted for a team leader role, how they were already planning a dinner, just in case he gets it, and I nodded, smiled, and kept my secret locked away. Because for the first time, I wasn't going to let them water down what I had achieved. I wasn't going to let them spin it or make it about Mark somehow. I was going to make sure that when they found out, it wouldn't be because I told them, it would be because they stumbled across it, and there would be no way to rewrite the story. And that decision, to keep silent, to plan carefully, to let them live in their version of reality just a little longer, was the first move in a plan I had no intention of abandoning. What came next wasn't just a purchase, it was a statement. And it started with one phone call to a realtor. When the final numbers came in from the project, I stared at the email for a good 10 minutes before it sank in that the figure on the screen wasn't a mistake, that the bonus I had just earned was enough to change not just my living situation, but the way I moved through the world entirely. It wasn't the kind of money you blow on a vacation or a new car. It was the kind of money that, if handled right, could make a permanent shift in your life, a shift that no one could take away or downplay. I had worked for years to get into a position where I could even be eligible for a payout like that, dragging myself through projects that other people quit halfway through, pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines no one else believed were possible, and absorbing enough stress to send most people straight into early retirement. And yet, in my family's eyes, I would always be the one quietly doing okay in the background, the one who kept busy but never quite deserved the spotlight. So I decided right then that I was not going to let this turn into another one of those situations where I mentioned it over dinner, got a polite nod, and then watched the conversation shift to how Mark had just been offered a chance to lead some small side project at work. No, this time I was going to play it differently. This time, I was going to take every ounce of that bonus and pour it into something that spoke louder than any toast, louder than any barbecue, louder than any of their carefully curated family narratives. And for me, that meant real estate, not just any real estate, but a place that was so far removed from what they pictured for me that it would stop them in their tracks. I spent the next few weeks quietly researching properties, using my lunch breaks and late nights to scroll through listings, not saying a word to anyone, not even my closest friends at work, because I wanted this to remain airtight. There was a certain thrill in knowing I was building something monumental under their radar, like I was finally taking control of a story they had always told for me. I narrowed it down to a handful of listings, all of them far above anything I had ever considered before, and when I walked into the penthouse that eventually became mine, I didn't even need to see the rest of the building to know it was the one. The space itself didn't just check boxes, it obliterated them. It was bold, it was undeniable, and most importantly, it was mine to claim without owing a single thank you to anyone in my family. The offer went in quickly, and when it was accepted, I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot outside my office, staring at the confirmation email and realizing that I had just committed to something that was going to alter the way my family saw me forever. The sheer satisfaction of knowing that every part of this was funded by my own work, without a cent from them, made me feel like I was finally stepping into a version of myself that they had never been able to see. The irony, of course, was that I wasn't doing this for their approval. That ship had sailed years ago, but I was absolutely doing it for the moment when their carefully crafted image of me would crack. In the weeks leading up to closing, I played my role in the family dynamic exactly as they expected. I listened to updates about Mark's latest, big opportunities, which, at that point, included him being asked to sit on a committee for planning the office holiday party. My parents went on about how it showed real leadership skills and hinted that they were thinking of helping him upgrade his car soon, and I smiled through it, never mentioning that I was signing paperwork for a home that would be worth more than anything they had ever owned. It was strange, almost liberating, to hold something that significant so close to the chest, to let them live in their assumptions while I moved pieces into place behind the scenes. The day I closed on the penthouse, I didn't tell a soul in my family. I went to the signing alone, shook the hand of the realtor who had no idea he was part of a long overdue personal victory, and walked out with keys that felt like more than just access to a property. They were access to a new power in my own story. I didn't take photos to send to anyone, didn't make a social media post, didn't even hint that something had happened. I wanted the reveal to be something they couldn't control, something they couldn't prepare for, something they would have to react to in real time without spinning at first. In the meantime, I started making quiet arrangements for the move, scheduling contractors and interior designers without ever mentioning why I was so busy lately when they asked. My mom assumed I was buried in work again, and I let her believe it. Mark joked that I was still living in that little place of yours, and I just smiled, knowing that he was about to eat those words in the most public way possible. By the time the renovations were wrapping up and the furniture was arriving, I had built a fortress of secrecy around the entire thing. No one outside of the people directly involved in the sale and the work knew a single detail. And I wasn't just doing this to avoid them trying to take credit, though I knew they would. I was doing it because, for once, I wanted to be the one who decided how my own story got told. I remember standing in the middle of that empty living room on the day before the official reveal, looking around and thinking, they have no idea. They think they know me. They think they can predict what I'll do and what I'm capable of, but they're about to be so completely wrong that they won't even know where to start. And that thought, that moment, was almost as satisfying as what came next. Because the reveal was coming, and I was about to let the world do my talking for me. I had never been the kind of person who cared much about making things public, but this time, the entire point of my plan was to let the reveal happen in the most unfiltered, uncontrolled way possible, where no one could claim they already knew, or pretend they were somehow involved from the beginning. So once the penthouse was fully furnished, the last contractor had left, and the keys had settled into my daily life, I waited, not because I wasn't ready to show it, but because I wanted the reveal to come from somewhere that wasn't me. If I had posted photos myself, my family could have easily brushed it off, scrolled past, or, worst of all, found some way to privately rewrite the story before it became public knowledge. I needed it to hit them like a wave they couldn't stop, something they had to see at the same time everyone else did, without warning and without context. The opportunity came faster than I expected. I had hired a well-known interior designer to help with the final touches, someone whose client list was filled with names my family would recognize instantly and respect without question. I chose him for his work, but I also knew that when he posted about the project, it would carry more weight than anything I could ever upload myself. Sure enough, a few weeks after the last piece of furniture was placed, he tagged me in a set of professional photos on his business page. The post wasn't about me personally, it was about one of my favorite transformations this year, but my name was right there, linked to a photo album filled with shots of a space that looked like it belonged in a luxury real estate magazine. The moment the tag appeared, my phone started buzzing. At first, I thought it might just be a couple of friends from work commenting on it, but then the notifications kept coming, not just likes and hearts from acquaintances, but message requests, group chat pings, and missed calls, all piling up so fast I couldn't keep up. I didn't even have to check to know that my family had seen it. They live for social media, for the appearance of being connected and accomplished, and something like this, something they hadn't orchestrated, would have been impossible for them to ignore. I opened the family group chat just to see, and it was already chaos. My mom had posted the link with about 5 exclamation marks. My dad had replied with a "wow. This is amazing," as if he hadn't spent my entire adult life acting like my career was an abstract concept, and Mark had chimed in with a half-joking, "Did you win the lottery or something?" Within minutes, aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were commenting on how proud they were and asking for a tour. It was the kind of flood of attention I had never received before, and the best part was that it hadn't come because I told them, it had come because they stumbled into it, unprepared, with no way to control the timing or the framing. I didn't reply. Not to the chat, not to the missed calls, not to the texts that started pouring in from numbers I barely recognized. Instead, I let the silence hang there, knowing it would drive them crazy. For years, I had been the one reaching out, giving updates, explaining my work, trying to justify why I deserved acknowledgement. Now they were the ones asking questions, chasing answers, trying to figure out how something like this had happened without them knowing. That role reversal was delicious in a way I hadn't anticipated. By the end of the day, the speculation had already started. My cousin messaged me privately to say my mom had been calling around, trying to find out if I'd gotten some kind of inheritance. A family friend left a comment under one of the designer's photos asking if the penthouse was a gift from someone special. I knew exactly what was going on. They were scrambling for a narrative that would make sense to them, one where my success wasn't purely the result of my own work. They couldn't just accept that I had done this on my own because it would mean admitting they had underestimated me for years. I spent that entire evening ignoring my phone, making dinner in my new kitchen, sitting on the balcony, and thinking about how every ring and buzz from that device was another reminder that I had finally turned the tables. I wasn't being petty, or at least, not only petty, I was reclaiming the power they'd taken from me by treating my life like an afterthought. And it wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about enjoying the fact that they had no choice but to sit with that proof, over and over, every time they looked at those photos. The next morning, I saw that my dad had tried calling 3 times after midnight. My mom had sent me a message that read, "We need to talk. Everyone is asking questions." And Mark had sent a single text, "You could have told us." That one made me laugh out loud, because for years, I had been telling them everything, and it had never made a difference. Now, I had told them nothing, and it was all they could think about. I didn't respond. Not yet. I wanted them to sit in it a little longer, to feel what it was like to be on the outside of the story for once, to realize that they weren't entitled to every detail of my life. Especially when they had spent so long ignoring the parts that didn't fit their preferred narrative. And as the silence stretched into a second day, I started to notice the shift. The messages became less about congratulations and more about curiosity, even a hint of desperation. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were trying to figure out how to reinsert themselves into the picture. But I wasn't ready to open that door, because I knew that once I did, they would start looking for ways to rewrite the ending. And I wasn't anywhere near finished with this story. By the third day, the tone had shifted from that loud chorus of cheerful congratulations to something sharper and more strategic. And even without answering a single call, I could feel the gears turning on their end as they tried to sort the narrative into one that kept them looking supportive and central. Because heaven forbid a big moment in my life exist without their fingerprints all over it. My mom began by posting a syrupy comment under one of the designer's photos about how she had always known I had good taste, which would have been harmless if it ended there, but it didn't, because my aunt then chimed in with a line about how family support makes anything possible, and by the time my dad dropped the phrase, "We're so proud to see our guidance paying off," I understood exactly what was happening, which was that they were building a soft landing for themselves by implying this. Leap had been cushioned by them, not fueled entirely by me. I watched the comments stack up like little bricks in a wall they were trying to build between me and the truth, and as predictable as it was, it still stung, because they weren't just stealing credit, they were turning the thing that had hurt me for years, the erasing, the minimizing, the patronizing, into the public story yet again, and if I let it stand, then the reveal would fade into another round of them smiling in the photos while I did the heavy lifting behind the scenes. My cousin, who has never been able to keep a secret or resist gossip, sent me a screenshot from a neighborhood Facebook group where my mother had actually replied to someone's question by saying, "We helped Erin get started," which would make sense if helped meant asked whether she'd thought about cheaper places, and I sat there on my couch thinking about how many versions of that sentence would spread by dinner if I stayed quiet for one more day. Mark, true to form, took another route, because while my parents go soft and sentimental when they want to own a story, my brother goes snide, and I woke up to a text from him that read, "So, looks like you finally caught up," which is the kind of message that tells you everything about the hierarchy he believes in, the unspoken ladder where he is always a rung above, no matter how flimsy the rung actually is. There was also a follow-up that said, "Mom and Dad are overwhelmed, you should post something to clarify," which made me laugh out loud because the idea that I should do damage control for spin they created was almost funny enough to forgive the condescension. Almost. What I did next was not impulsive, because I had imagined this moment a dozen times and rehearsed a dozen versions of it in my head, and I had promised myself that if I ever played this card, I would do it cleanly, plainly, and in a way that left no space for counterarguments or backpedaling. I went back to the designer's post, scrolled through the comments until I found the thread where the family support myth was blooming, and I wrote one sentence that said everything without performance or drama. That I bought the home outright using a performance bonus from a deal I led, that no family money was involved, and that I was grateful to the colleagues who believed in me when I had to push past a wall of doubt that did not come from my workplace. Then I tagged my boss, who has the kind of profile that makes people shut up and pay attention, and I put my phone face down on the table and let that sentence breathe. He replied quickly. He always does when one of his people gets a win that reflects on the team, and his message was simple, a public congratulations that named the deal and thanked me for carrying it across the finish line. And with that one reply, the oxygen in the family's balloon began to leak, because it is hard to argue with someone who carries real authority in the space you once dismissed as paper-pushing. The comment thread slowed. The relatives who had been loudly so proud went quiet, and the side messages pivoted from warm ownership to careful curiosity. With questions about how long I had been planning this and whether I had considered hosting a family dinner to bring everyone together. I did not gloat, though I will not pretend I did not feel that sharp, satisfying click you get when a messy drawer finally slides into place after years of jamming and tugging. Instead, I kept my response posture exactly where I wanted it, which was firm, calm, and unreachable. When my mother called again, I let it ring, and when she texted that people were misunderstanding her words, I replied for the first time with a line that was not cruel, just precise. That the truth does not need a microphone and that I was not interested in revisions to a story they ignored while it was being written. She sent back 3 messages in a row, each shorter than the last, ending with "We should talk." Mark escalated, because of course he did, and his next text was the kind of thing that once would have shaken me. "You're making us look bad," but instead it clarified everything, because in that sentence he admitted the part they never say out loud, which is that my achievements are only welcome when they can be folded into their brand, that my wins are acceptable so long as they serve their image, that the problem is not the truth but the optics. I took a breath, thought about writing something that would land like a slap, and chose a different angle, one that would stick even longer. I sent him a short voice note in which I told him, slowly and evenly, that I am not their public relations department, that my life is not a family campaign, and that I will not bend 1 inch for optics again. Then, because revenge in this story is not about shouting but about structure, I made a move that closed a door they had always held open for themselves. I created a small guest list for a housewarming, not an event with speeches or gifts, just a gathering of the people who had stepped up for me when it was inconvenient, the colleague who covered a red-eye flight so I could sleep 4 hours before a pitch, the friend who proofread decks at midnight, the neighbor who fed my cat when I lived like a ghost for a quarter, and I sent out invitations without a single family name on it. When my mother asked about a tour, I told her the truth, that I would be hosting something soon for the people who made the win possible, and that if she wanted to come to my home as a guest in good faith, the first requirement was that she stop telling people she paid for the door. She didn't answer right away, and the 3 dots blinked for a long time, and for the first time in years I did not rush to fill the silence with explanations or soft landings, because I wanted that pause to stretch and force a choice, own the behavior or keep pretending. The dots vanished, then returned, then vanished again, and when her reply finally arrived it was one line that said we would discuss this as a family on Sunday. I looked at the screen, felt the old reflex tug at me, and decided the next move would be mine, not theirs, because this was the part of the story where I stopped letting invitations masquerade as summons. So I typed back that Sunday would not work for me, that my week was full, and that if they wanted to see me they could ask, not demand, and I hit send, and then I did one last thing before I turned off my phone for the night. I posted a single photo of a blank wall in my new place with a caption about hanging the first framed deal memo I had ever kept, and I tagged no one. The likes rolled in, my boss dropped a thumbs up, and my brother started typing. Sunday came and went without me rearranging my life to fit a family calendar invite disguised as a command, and by Monday morning the missed calls had turned into a new kind of pressure that sounded polite on the surface and controlling underneath. The kind of tone I know too well from years of being asked to make everything easier for everyone else. So when the building concierge rang to say my parents and my brother were downstairs, just hoping to pop up for a quick hello, I took a breath. Thanked him for the heads up and told him I wasn't accepting unannounced guests today, not because I wanted to be dramatic or cruel, but because I needed to set a clean line that said I am no longer the person who drops everything to manage their anxiety about optics, and while I could already picture my mother's face when she heard the words, "She's not available," I also felt a calm I hadn't felt in years, the quiet that comes from acting like the adult in your own life. They did not take it well, obviously, and the texts moved from "please call us" to "this is getting out of hand" to the greatest hit of all. Families work through things together, which would have landed differently if together had not always meant me absorbing the discomfort while they kept the story tidy for themselves. So I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote the first message in this whole mess that I knew I would never regret. A message that was direct and careful and left no space for the usual detours, and I told them that I love them and that I am not available for group interventions or emergency optics repair, that I would be happy to see them when two simple things happened. The first being a public correction of the idea that they financed any part of my home, and the second being a basic acknowledgement that minimizing me for so long was not just how we are, it was a choice that hurt. And that until those two things appeared in plain language, a visit to my home would not. I expected a fight, and I got one. First from my brother, who wrote a long paragraph about how I was overreacting and how no one meant anything by it, ending with the line that he hoped I was not burning bridges over a Facebook caption, which made me laugh in that bitter way you do when someone reduces years of being erased into a single screenshot. And then from my mother, who tried the soft landing with phrases about misunderstandings and people twisting words, followed by my father, who sent one sentence asking why I was punishing them for being proud, and for a second the old reflex kicked hard, that urge to smooth and soothe and make them comfortable, but it passed. And what remained was the plan I had been building quietly while they argued with a boundary that was not moving. The plan was simple and clean, and it spoke in the only language this family listens to, which is receipts. So I took a portion of what I would have spent hosting a large family dinner, and I funded a small annual scholarship through my company's foundation for a junior woman on my team to cover certification and travel for a national presentation. And I named it in honor of the women in our department who carried weight without credit, and in the announcement I included one single line that the award existed to celebrate work that stands on its own, without borrowed shine, and I asked our comms lead to publish it on the same channels that had already been buzzing about the deal. And when it went live, my boss shared it with a note that said he'd never seen someone use a personal win to pull another woman up so fast, and that was the moment I knew the narrative had locked, because they could not compete with that without looking small. Then I did one more thing that was less public and more surgical, the kind of move that keeps the story honest for the people who had already heard the spin. And I sent a single email to the extended family and the couple of family friends who had reached out directly, not a manifesto, just a straight note that said I appreciated the kind words and wanted to be clear that I had bought the home with a performance bonus, that my parents had not paid for it, and that while I loved them, I would be stepping back until we could agree on basic truth, and I closed it by inviting them to cheer for the young women who would benefit from the scholarship if they were in the mood to celebrate something real. The replies trickled in, and they told their own story. Cousin saying, "Good for you," an aunt writing that she was proud of my backbone, an old family friend quietly admitting that the favoritism had been obvious for years, and my mother, copying my father, finally sending a message that said they were sorry if their words suggested they had paid for anything and that they were proud of me, period. It was not perfect, and it was not a movie apology, but it was the sentence I had asked for, out loud and in writing, which meant the door to a visit could open on my terms. So I told them they could come by for an hour on Friday afternoon, that there would be coffee, not a tour, and that we would keep it simple. And when they arrived, they tried so hard to be light and bright that it almost worked on me, but I kept one anchor in place, and I said the thing no one had ever said in our home, which was that I will not trade honesty for peace again, and if we are going to be in each other's lives, the rules are changing. My mother cried a little, my father nodded more than he spoke, and my brother looked like he had swallowed a lemon, and then he did the thing I knew was coming, which was ask, in that careful way he uses when he wants something, whether I could introduce him to my boss because he had some ideas about jumping companies, and I took a long sip of coffee, set the cup down, and told him that I will always share advice, I will always point someone toward a door, but I do not hand out keys to anyone who cannot say the sentence that matters, which is that I did this myself. He stared at me, then at the floor, then at our parents, and he could not say it, which told me everything I needed to know about where we stood, so I walked them to the elevator and said we could try again when the basics were in place. And after the doors closed, I went back inside and felt a steadiness that did not ask for applause, because the win was not the square footage or the view or even the splash on social media. The win was that I am not performing my life for their approval anymore. Later that night, I hosted the housewarming I had planned from the start, the small one with the people who had carried weight for me when it was inconvenient, and we ate and laughed and told the kind of stories that leave a person feeling seen instead of managed. And after everyone left, I posted one photo from the evening with a caption that said, "Celebrating with my real team," and I tagged no one in my family. An hour later, my brother liked the post and said nothing. My mother sent a heart and did not ask for credit. My father forwarded a link to the scholarship with a short line about being proud that I was helping someone else climb. And I sat there in the quiet with my phone face down and understood that the silence I heard for years as dismissal now sounded like respect, because it finally came after the truth, and that is where I left it, not tidy or fairy tale perfect, but finished in the way that matters, with the story in my hands and the last move mine.